Welcome everyone to this special interview edition of Monday Match Analysis. I'm Gill Gross. Today's episode is our post-major Roland Garros chat with the great Hall of Fame tennis writer Steve Flink. Most of you know the drill by now, but Steve and I will start with Carlos Alcaraz's title, the final against Zverev. We then talk about the massive semifinal between Alcaraz and Jannik Sinner. Then we get into a little bit of Medvedev talk, a little bit of Tsitsipas and Ruud talk, and finally, Novak Djokovic at the very end. We normally go into an immense amount of detail in these conversations as opposed to covering a large swath of players, but as always, it is an honor and a pleasure to talk to Steve, and I think that you guys are going to enjoy this one. A reminder before we get going that the draw did come out on Tuesday morning, as it always does. This is my tennis newsletter, your one-stop shop for the best tennis content on the internet every week, delivered straight to your mailbox. It is not too late to check out the Week 23 edition here in 2024, featuring some stuff on Iga's serve speed, the overrule controversy, some technology that's been developed to end cheating in junior tennis, Novak's recovery timeline, settlement in the Zverev domestic violence trial, a new WTA COO, that's Chief Operating Officer, big news there. Federer giving a commencement speech at Dartmouth University, worth watching and checking out. And the Murray brothers at Wimbledon, Jamie and Andy teaming up at Wimbledon. Content on all of that in the draw that came out Tuesday morning. Again, go to thedraw.tennis to subscribe. Link is also in the description. Mailbag post on the YouTube community tab is also up and running, so you can leave a comment there, or you can leave a comment in the Discord, which we have just launched. That link, the invite link, is also in the description. I'm super pleased with how it started. We launched just a couple days ago. We already have 300 members in the Discord. It's been a lot of fun to talk tennis. First 20 minutes or so of the mailbag I will be dedicating to Discord questions, so check that out. And now, without further ado, here's Steve Flink. We're joined once again by Hall of Fame tennis writer Steve Flink for our traditional post-major chat, Roland Garros 2024. Always a pleasure. Steve, good to see you again.
Gil, same here. Back at you. Looking forward to it.
We're going to go right to the final, but before that, I want to ask you about Carlos Alcaraz's accomplishment here. Now he starts his career with 3 majors, all on different surfaces. Few would have predicted that clay would be the last domino to fall if you rewind a couple of years ago, but that's how it all played out. Is there something about his game, in your opinion, that is particularly versatile across all surfaces? Or is it also just a product of the times where if you're a top player, you can win on all surfaces and that's just the direction of the game? Do you think it's a little bit of both, or
yes,
yeah,
yes, I do. I was exactly what I was going to say. It's a bit of both, because he is so versatile. Maybe there are times it gets in his own way. You make the wrong choices, but he has so many options. And I mean, we'll talk about the final, but obviously he really drove Zverev a bit nuts with some of those high looping returns, standing back near the fence a la Medvedev and looping those returns back down the middle. And Zverev is saying to himself, why do I have to deal with this? Nobody else is doing this to me. So I just feel like the versatility, the virtuosity is just there. And in the modern game, maybe, you don't have as drastic a difference in the services. But I would say I want to be a little bit more positive about it, that it's a bit more his greatness, his versatility, his flexibility.
Yeah, that's kind of where I stand with it as well. There are things about his game that are awesome on every surface. The clay with the kick serve and the heavy RPM forehand and the drop shot and the loopy stuff works a little better. Then on grass, for example, if we go to the other end of the spectrum, the offensive repertoire where he's coming forward and he's just threatening from all parts of the court. That works so well also. But you mentioned the inventiveness. You mentioned the high loopy returns. What stood out to me about the performance in the final against Zverev was the tactics and the variety. So I'm so glad you brought that up. But I mean, what do you think Alcaraz's plan was? How would you describe Alcaraz's plan and what he was able to execute?
Yeah, that's a tough one to say. I mean, he certainly felt like, okay, the first thing he wanted to do was to make, he knew that in Australia on the hard court there, he'd gotten basically served off the court at times. And he could easily have been gone in straight sets. And he did very well to salvage the third set after Zverev was on the verge of winning it there. And to a degree, that happened to him 2 years ago in Roland Garros when he lost to Zverev. He was having a very difficult time making first serve returns. So I think that was the first order of business. I think was that positioning. Now I don't know how you felt. I was a bit surprised that he got away from it. That there was a stage in the second and third there, right up until Zverev served out the set at 6-5, having when he was on his 5-game run. Where finally, toward the end of that game, Carlos moved back again and started making life difficult. In a way, I thought he should have stuck with it. I don't know what his thinking was or Ferrero's was, because he broke him 3 times in the first set. It was working. He had him a bit perplexed. The second thing that confounded me, Gil, was Zverev is one of the best servers in the sport. He certainly is right up there among the best first servers, and he's no longer double faulting the way he did. He has found balance on his second serve, but the main thing is the first serve is so good. I don't understand a guy of his caliber not finding a way to adjust a bit better when Carlos was so far back, and doing a little more the obvious serve volley play in the deuce court, going wide and opening the court. And he could have tried that out in the ad court. It's not as easy to do it in the ad court, but he's a tall guy who can find that angle going out wide in the ad court too. So he doesn't, you don't necessarily have to be a great volleyer to pull off that tactic when a guy is that far back. Chances are you're going to get a pretty easy first volley. So that surprised me. But to Carlos's credit, he immediately put some doubts into Zverev's mind. He put him down a set. It took a set for Zverev to adjust. He obviously served much better in the second and was much better off the ground too. But I thought that was part of the plan, and that the other part was, again, even during the rallies, throw in the change of pace, throw in the high trajectory topspin, the loopers. Don't just slug, because there are times when Sasha will get the better of him. So I just felt like it's almost like he had a couple of different plans in mind, depending on what he needed to do. But it was a great start for him.
We talked about the Australian Open match, and I still remember the word you used to describe Alcaraz's tactical tendencies in that match. You said it was macho. He had a macho streak in that match where he wanted to run side to side with Zverev, hit balls fast and straight, not shy away from his backhand, Zverev's backhand, which is a scary, scary shot to contend with.
Yeah.
And Alcaraz didn't shy away, and maybe he should have. And this was actually the opposite of macho. You almost need to, it's silly in a way, but you almost need to swallow a little bit of pride to throw up the moon balls.
Yes, you do. You do.
Right. And he did it. And it makes sense against Zverev, Steve, because Sasha doesn't love to generate his own pace, and he's not that good at it. He'd rather the ball come in hard.
Absolutely right. And he was getting the ball coming in hard in Australia. And in his forehand, to me, it was, I've never seen it look better than it did for the first 2.5 sets. And then, okay, he went off a bit, but by and large, the forehand was great in that match. And you're right. The last thing he wants to see is that ball, that high topspin coming his way, and having to think about what he was going to do to combat it. And so that was very smart. I don't know if it was Ferrero. I suspect Ferrero had something to say about that, but that Carlos liked the idea too. And it's great credit to him, because we think of him always being as the great crowd pleaser, playing to the crowd, not in a terrible way, but enjoying the idea of making spectacular shots that are going to leave the crowd gasping. And that was not his attitude in either the semis or the final, in my view. And particularly in the final, it was not his attitude. It was like, no, I'm going to do what it takes to beat this guy. I'm not losing to him again on this court. I'm not losing to him for the third time in a major. And I will employ the tactics that are going to benefit me.
Yeah, I agree. Alcaraz served for a 2-1 lead at 5-3, got broken made a couple of mistakes in that game. Zverev hit some good backhand passing shots, but Alcaraz came in behind a serve that didn't have any angle, came in behind an approach shot that didn't have
Yeah,
any angle.
yeah.
And they came in hard, and it was kind of what we're talking about with Alcaraz losing his tactics for a moment there. The question I want to ask is, how did you feel about the final after that third set? Zverev up 2-1, Alcaraz having blown that lead. Where was your head at that time?
Well, I didn't think Zverev was quite in the driver's seat, but what I thought was going to happen, Gil, and did not, was at the very least he was going to put in a serious effort in the fourth. He was going to say to himself, okay, I've got to stay with Carlos here. Particularly when he got down the break, Carlos hit a great forehand pass. Okay, fair enough. But then you make sure you don't go down two breaks, and you try to find a way to get back on serve, and you try to find a way to somehow get through that set. Plus, I don't think Carlos was feeling that great at that stage. He ended up calling the trainer later, when he was down four, when he went down 4-1 in that set, he called the trainer, right? And that was after he'd lost his serve. But those first four games, 5 points for Sasha, that's really surprised me. You have the cushion of a 2-1 lead, you want to keep Carlos working, and you're kind of aware that he may not be feeling that great either. There were signs of that. He'd come off a 5-set semi. So I felt like, I don't know whether, I know Zverev said afterwards that his own legs went at a certain point. He felt like he'd lost the spring in his legs. But I was really surprised. You're one set away from winning a major for the second time, and you don't want to let it get, and you got to be thrilled that you pulled the third set out from 2-5 down. Not only the game you mentioned at 5-3 and the way Carlos played that game, but Zverev was down 15-30 in the previous game and served his way out of it. It could have even been a 6-2 set against him. So to get out of that and win it, and not be down 2-1 and have that lead to work with, it just surprised me that it was almost a giveaway set. I mean, no, Carlos lifted his level. I know. I give him a lot of credit. He was very poised and cut down on his errors, but I felt like Zverev sort of let himself down there. And even after Carlos lost his serve, Gil, in the 4-love game, and then called the trainer, and as it turned out, it obviously was nothing serious, Zverev had a chance to hold. They had at least one game point in the next game. He doesn't hold. I mean, that would have been interesting to just grab that game, make it 4-2, create a little tension, see how Carlos responds at 4-2, instead of putting yourself in a 5-1 hole. And even then, he had break points in the last game of that set and didn't convert those. So I thought it was a disappointing performance from his end, given what was at stake. And then, I felt like he'd make that push in the fifth, and he tried, but I think the fifth was kind of a disaster for him, particularly the 1-all game in the fifth.
Awful service game,
horrendous, and kind of inexplicable, given that he's serving in front. He's got a chance to keep going to 2-1, 3-2, 4-3, put some scoreboard pressure on, and at least make Carlos earn the break. But the backhand volley down the line was ridiculous. Carlos was completely stranded on the other side of the court. He had no play. The volley just had to be average, just keep it in the court, and he punches it long. And then that kind of serve volley where he came in and just bungled the forehand volley. And then of course a double fault, and finally he lost the game on a backhand unforced error. So Carlos really didn't earn any of those points, and that really shocked. That did surprise me, because I'm thinking going into the fifth, okay, the fifth's going to be tight. I still would have favored Carlos, but I was looking for a tight fifth. And sure there was the unfortunate overrule by the umpire when Zverev could have been back to 2-all on an apparent double fault. And by the way, I want to get your thoughts on that, Gil.
Yeah, we'll go there. We'll get there. Let's.
Okay.
A couple interesting points you made there. First of all, I didn't hear Zverev's comments about his legs going at a certain point, but I just want to harken back in that case to the fact that he went 5 with Griekspoor, 5 with Rune.
Right.
And at that point in the tournament, I actually said, well, I don't think he can win 7 matches with having gone through that. I mean, he's got 3 more to go. Now, straight sets against De Minaur, very easy match against Ruud. By the time the final came around,
right,
I had brushed that aside and said, I think he's probably fine. But I mean, if he said that, that's where my head goes there. And the level throughout the run from Zverev, and we saw this at the Australian Open as well, was not consistent enough for him to avoid those longer matches. So I think that's one interesting thing.
Yeah.
What I'll say about the 2-1 situation is, just in the larger picture, I feel like that's where the big test starts for Zverev, because there's the scar tissue from not really just the US Open. Obviously that's the big one, the 2020 final. But in general, he's a player who I feel like is far more affected by nerves than most, as far as, the ability to just play your game, even when the pressure reaches 10 out of 10. So when he was up 2-1, I thought to myself, this is where the real test begins, and that's where, yeah, I think the forehand didn't come off the same. It wasn't like it was in the second set, where it was big and confident. And the volleys really let him down. And, the fact that the serve and volley would have been the obvious tactical counter to the way
Right.
Alcaraz was returning
Right.
on the back fence, put a ton of air under it.
Right. Right.
Serve and volley is the way to go. But we saw from even moments in the fourth set and the fifth set that he probably, not that he serves and volleys a lot, period, but even if he recognized it was the right play, the way he was hitting his volleys, you wonder if he felt within himself that he wasn't confident coming forward, as proactively as it would have been required.
Yeah, that's a good point. On the other hand, suppose he served in volley. Suppose when he saw that going on in the first set, that he forced himself to do it a bit and volleyed a bit more. You get more comfortable the more you come in. I remember talking to Pete Sampras about that once, about how at a certain point in his career there in the 90s, he hadn't been always serving and volleying second serve. He would do it always on the first, but the second he wouldn't. And he felt like the more he started coming in, the more pressure he put on, the more he came in and volleyed, the better his volley got. And I have a feeling in the course of this match that might have been the case with Zverev. You're right. It was bad later on. I wonder whether part of that was just he was tight then too. I felt he was quite, you mentioned nerves, and I think nerves were kicking in that fifth, to be sure. And whatever the case, it was, it was, I just felt like he had to have tried it more earlier, because Carlos was giving away so much court there, the way Medvedev does, and you have to take advantage of it.
Let's get to the Zverev slam question. First of all, numbers wise, I am curious if you think he is the most accomplished player to have never won a major at this time, considering 2 year-end championships, 6 Masters 1000s, Olympic gold, but also how damaging is this? And like, okay, Lendl lost a lot of finals, Murray lost a lot of finals. They got there eventually, but in general, I think it's hard. The more you kind of get close and you lose, especially when you've dealt with some of the issues that Zverev has dealt with. He's been in winning positions both times. The more that happens, the harder it is to actually get it done.
So true. No, that's a good point. Lendl and Murray, they lost 4 finals each, broke through on the 5th. But you felt like they were going to keep getting back there. You felt like to me, there was a certain inevitability that they were going to break through. I'm worried about Zverev now. I don't know, given where things are at the top of the men's game, where Alcaraz is going to keep improving. Sinner is too. Novak's not done yet. We'll see what happens with him over the next year, depending on recovering from the knee. But I just feel like, and the point you mentioned earlier, it seems like Sasha can't avoid getting these long 5-setters. That he's going to have at least 1, maybe 2 on his way to a semi or a final that could, and that's really what happened here, getting back to your earlier point. Perhaps in the end, that's what happened, and why his legs were going a bit in the 4th and 5th. Everything caught up to him. So can he avoid, is he going to be able to go through a major and maybe only drop 1 or 2 sets on his way to the semis and be very fresh? I don't know. I have my doubts about that. And I have my doubts about him beating the big guys. What worried me about him coming into this final the most was he's playing Carlos in a final rather than the quarterfinals of a major, which all of the others were. I mean, when he beats him, when he beats him at Roland Garros 2 years ago, that's a quarter. This
Yep.
Australian was a quarter. That's totally different. He's not thinking about the title. I worried that that's what was going to eventually do him in, and I think that was a big part of it.
Yeah, same here. I picked him to the final because I felt he was playing the tennis to get to the final, but I don't trust him in that final based on
No,
what I've
no.
seen. So I'm right there with you, and time will tell, obviously. As for the line controversy, most people watching and listening probably heard what I had to say directly after the final. But Steve, I feel that it's unfair to assume that Renaud Liechtenstein on a 2 millimeter call misread the mark for sure, because the margin for error for Hawkeye is 2 to 3 millimeters. So I'm not saying this is highly likely, but there's a chance, there's a possibility that the mark was in. And the margin of error came into play and showed this miniature 2 millimeter call is out. And I just think the fact that on television we see the results of the Hawkeye, but we don't see the ball mark, biases everyone towards what the Hawkeye says. It'd be interesting if we actually got to see the ball mark, and then we could compare notes, but we can't. And those two systems can reasonably differ. Now, I prefer electronic line calling. I think it's better. I'm excited for it to be implemented. But since that wasn't the system in place, I think you got to live with the results of the mark check by a chair umpire who's a gold badge umpire, a veteran of the game who has been doing this a very long time at a very high level.
Interesting. I'm glad we have a slight disagreement because we usually think exactly like. Here's what I would say. I completely get what you're saying. I too just want to see the electronic lines. But here's what I would say about that call. It's a second serve down the tee. To me, the linesman has a much better view of that line, looking straight at the line from where he's sitting, than the umpire above the court, to the side. Okay, he's looking down. He sees the line well, but that view to me is not as good. So what I didn't like about it, Gil, was that the linesman calls it out. He sees the mark differently. Zverev disagrees about. That's the other problem we have with these disputes, is that Zverev doesn't see the same mark he does, and they're disputing
Well,
about
I
whether.
think I think they did agree on the mark,
Yeah,
but Zverev has been arguing. We've watched him all tournament long. He was arguing every mark. He was like
yeah, he
50% of the
was.
time, 50% of the time he was disagreeing. Hawkeye proves Zverev wrong a ton of times over the course of the
Yeah, that's
tournament.
fair. That's true. I get you on that. But what I'm saying is, I think the linesman has a better view. Then this whole this whole discussion about the 2 millimeter margin for error, I still would take Hawkeye over this great. And I agree, he's a very fine umpire, but I'd still take Hawkeye. And I just feel like it's weird because, as you know, they don't do it too much. They don't overdo the coming down to the court. They don't want to have to do too much of that. But I would rather have seen the linesman's call hold up. Having said that, that was my feeling. That's why I'm so looking forward and hope that Jim Courier is wrong, and when he predicts that the French won't want to use the electronic lines last year because they're traditionalists, and he may well be right. Just hope he's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like, let's just get away from this. You're right. Zverev has a habit of arguing too many and often being wrong. Other players don't. Novak won a couple of those, including match point against Cerundolo, got the umpire to come down and was vindicated. But I want to see the electronic, because I also hate the idea. I'm sure you do too, Gil, just in general, when the challenges were there, the players having to react that fast. And I mean, to challenge a call, you like Novak was taking a chance at match point, but he stopped and it worked. But I think they're in a terrible position having to do that. That's why I so much
Yeah.
prefer the electronic.
And terrible inconsistency when it comes to when challenges are allowed and when they're disallowed, and did you
Right.
stop and did you not stop, which is
Yeah.
subjective, and I saw a lot of inconsistency. Just respond to, I don't want to spend too long on this, but it's a juicy
Yeah.
controversy. So I agree with you. The lines judge's angle on the mark is 1,000 times better than the chair umpire.
Right.
So on a
Right.
hard court or a grass court, when there's no mark checks, I would be strongly against any sort of overrule in that situation. I'd say an overrule would be absolutely wrong in that case. But for clay, right, Alcaraz hit the second serve and immediately it was like, ooh, that was really close. He was going to check the mark.
Right.
If Liechtenstein stayed in his chair and didn't want to check the mark, I think Carlitos would have said, "Can you go check the mark?" Because it was
Yeah,
that
you're right.
close. And
Good
then,
point.
well, once the umpire is looking at the mark, at that point they need to decide: do they see a space or do you not see a space? And it can't be, I'm just going to go with the line stretch. At that point, you're looking at the mark and you need to read the mark.
Yeah, that's a good, I hear what you're saying. In a way, he did get drawn into it. I just think it's an unfortunate thing because Zverev has heard the call. In his mind, it's now 2 games all. I sympathize with any player going through that because you've heard the call and you think you've got the break back and you're already thinking ahead, and then suddenly the umpire is coming down there, and again, he you're right. Zverev is wrong about a lot of his disputes, and he could have been wrong on this. But when I saw that Hawkeye, my feeling was looking at the Hawkeye, I'm trusting that more than I'm trusting the umpire that
And the mark check.
that ball was just wide. Either way, I will say this, Gil. I don't think Zverev could possibly say that's what cost him the match. He ended up having a break point the next time around to get back to 3-all, and Carlos served and volleyed and got out of it. I don't buy it. I think chances are he gets broken one more time, but obviously it would have given him a lift at least to be back on serve and feeling like he could serve his way out in front again. I definitely don't think it cost him the match or that there'd be any case for that. Do you agree?
I do agree. I think the way the match ended up playing out, I don't discount the mental component that Zverev had to deal with as a result of how that went with the call and likely feeling wronged at that point. Alcaraz did have to come up with an amazing shot to win that 15-40 point after they played let. I mean, that was an amazing backhand slice.
He did. It was.
Yeah, from a defensive position, it was just perfect. But yeah, I mean, I think everything was trending Alcaraz the way the match was going. And obviously, if you look at the scoreline, fourth and fifth set, Zverev wasn't even in either of them really.
No, he was. And what he should be looking at himself, I know he felt like would have been a big difference to be back to 2-all, but he should be a little more self-critical too, Gil, and about what he did at 1-all to put himself down the break in the first place.
Right. I was more outraged in Monte Carlo with the Sinner Tsitsipas match. There was a call that was way outside the margin of error.
Yes.
It was not even a close call, and the umpire read the mark wrong. And in that case, it's a clear mistake from the umpire. There's no debate about it. And to me, that's more, and it was a game point, just like this one. And
it was a break point.
Yes.
And it would have put him up 2 breaks. It would have been over.
Yeah, right. 5-2 or something.
5-2, right?
Yeah,
would have been 5-2. Yeah, that was a terrible luck. I was amazed by that because you're right. It was clearly out, and you could almost feel it and see it watching it on TV. I mean, and Sinner knew it. Sinner was really surprised, and there's no call. Yeah, you're right. The umpire, no overrule. Yeah, that was a lot worse.
Yeah. For me, the margin of error, like the distance of the mistake, it matters a lot in my head. But I totally understand, and at least we agree on one thing: we want electronic line calling because overall it's a more accurate system, and it
takes the burden off the player. I just don't think it's fair. I mean, I love the challenges for the drama and the fact that they had some recourse, but I never liked the fact that you had to make that split-second decision on whether you wanted to challenge or not.
Yep. Yeah, and I also hate the okay, Coco. You had the Coco thing as well, right? She was hitting a return.
Yeah.
As the lines judge said out. It was very simultaneous to me, which for me means it could have easily and probably did affect the shot. But the umpire then needs to replay that in their head and try to make a determination of, do we replay the point or does the server win the point in that case? And that's unfair to the umpire. That's too difficult a call to make, and they mess it up all the time.
Yeah, they do.
Let's go to let's go to the Sinner semifinal now with with Sinner Alcaraz. We don't need to talk about Zverev Ruud, I don't think. I feel the main difference in Sinner Alcaraz was the offensive shot making from Carlitos and the movement. So, damage and finishes were coming much easier to Alcaraz throughout that match.
Yeah, true. True. I agree. And when he got in the flow as he did, especially in the fourth and fifth, that was clearly the case. Where the I didn't like the level from either, frankly, in the first three sets.
Mm-hmm.
I liked Carlos's level a lot in the last two, and the discipline and the consistency and the aggression that you alluded to. I was a little baffled. I thought in the first set, Carlos was just out of sorts and hadn't found his range, not serving well. Sinner has that 4-love lead, and Carlos makes a mini comeback, and Sinner pulls away again. Easy 6-2 set, and then he's up that break in the second. Now, when you've just had a match in Indian Wells the last time you played this guy, and you won the first set 6-1, and he came back against you, I would love it if I'm Sinner to say, okay, I'm up 2-love now, and I'm going to bear down. I've got to take advantage of this. He's in trouble, and I'm rolling, and I've got to break. And I felt that set slipped away very quickly. Obviously, Carlos came back to win 8 out of 10 games himself after Sinner had started the match by winning 8 out of 10 games. I felt like neither guy was playing well at the same time at that stage of the match.
I totally agree. And the second set downturn from Jannik from up 2-love in the second
Right.
is to me the most puzzling part of the match, because Alcaraz didn't really wrestle it away from Sinner. It's just Jannik suddenly dipped. I do think I thought his best set was the first, Sinner.
It was good. I thought it was a very good set. But I thought Carlos was also really mistiming a lot of balls. Combination of how good Sinner was and how off Carlos was. But then again, we see the second set the same way. You know how important it is if you can somehow get him down 2 sets. It doesn't mean Carlos is out of the match, because he's never out of it. But it would have just, yeah, exactly. It was the dip. It was the decline in Sinner that enabled Carlos to win that set really easily and then go up that break in the third. And the third was interesting, I thought, because he had the break for 2-1, Carlos, and Sinner gets it back. And then the cramping in his hand started in the next game, but he somehow got through that long game, the fifth game, and held on. That was a really crucial hold that carried him to, he was able to run out the break in the next game and win that set. But did you have any indication? I was shocked when Carlos later said that he too was cramping. I'm trying to figure out where. Was he cramping in his legs? Was he cramping in his hand?
Hand. So I saw it. I saw it for a split second. And I think the trouble is for you and I, who weren't courtside, the camera, the NBC, or I actually not sure if it was NBC. It might have been Roland Garros world feed that directs the images. The images started between the points, started to really focus in on Jannik. And I think Carlos was also probably trying to hide it a little bit. But I saw him, if you're watching on YouTube, you'll see me. I saw him take the racket out of his hand and kind of do one of these. And I thought to myself, is his hand cramping? And then a couple points later, Sinner's hand started cramping.
Yeah,
and
right.
I never saw it again from Alcaraz. It was just that one thing. But what I did see from Alcaraz was an horrible downturn in serve quality and forehand quality in the third set while Sinner was cramping. But Steve, I attributed it at the time, even though I saw that little sign of a hand cramp, that I ended up thinking, oh, okay, I haven't seen it again. So it was probably nothing.
So it's nothing. Right.
I thought it was the nerves of seeing Sinner on the other side cramping, and that ended up affecting Alcaraz.
That's what I thought. That's why I was surprised when Carlos said that afterwards. That's interesting that you caught that one glimpse, because I did not. But I did think it was a good effort from Sinner to just get himself through that fifth game somehow, call the trainer, and he seemed to gradually get better. And I thought, okay, he's now giving himself a second chance here. He doesn't have this match under control, but now he's 2-1. He's got to be happy that he got going again and rebuilt the lead. And I thought the fourth set, I liked the fourth set. in the sense that both guys were now holding with ease. And Sinner had only lost 3 points on his serve. Carlos was barely losing points as well, all the way up to that 4-5 game. And then, of course, it's 30-love for Sinner. And I honestly think, Gil, 30-love is the most deceptive lead in tennis. And I've always felt that. I've seen so many top players lose their serve from 30-love. And I think if you feel like you're closer than you are. And for whatever the reason, I mean, Carlos played a great topspin lob on that 30-love point, but then that missed smash. Did you think that Sinner was too aware that Carlos had stayed over on the backhand side and it threw him off at the last minute because he went down the line wide? You know, when he could have actually tried, considering that it was an overhead taken on the bounce, he could have really hit it hard cross court. And I don't think that would have been much of a play for Carlos. And I was baffled by that. What did you think?
Yeah, if you're gonna circle a shot, that was the one. I've only watched it once, really. So I watched it the first time. I haven't seen it again. I'd love to look back at it, but my recollection is Sinner hit that overhead clean, middle of the strings, and
Yeah,
still missed it wide. And
yeah,
that to me is like that's almost a tell. You've been psyched out by your opponent's anticipation, and
yeah,
you picked an aggressive a target that's too aggressive. What you want to do in that situation, it's very easy for you and I to say this, just hit it, commit to it.
right,
And even if you've hit it right at Alcaraz, you've still hit an overhead that's probably 110 miles per hour and you're at the net. So
right,
if he
right.
passes you, okay.
Or if he throws up another lob, okay.
Right.
Maybe that's most likely what he's going to do. But I just think it was the worst possible time. If he goes to 40-15, holds for 5-all, pretty good chance the way they both were serving that we get to a tiebreak. And then Sinner might have had his chance to close it out. I thought that really threw him for such a loop that it was no surprise whatsoever that he got down immediately in the fifth, was down 3-love before you knew it, because I honestly think he was still haunted by the way that four set suddenly slipped away from the from 4-5 30-love.
Yeah, and it should be noted once he went up 30-love, he missed 3 out of his next 4 first serves. So
Yeah,
the serve
yeah,
wasn't there to help him out. And Alcaraz did hit a awesome open stance backhand at 30-all, which reminded me a lot of the Indian Wells backhand down the line that he
yeah.
hit
It was. It
to
was
save break point. Yeah.
Yeah, it was similar.
Um,
And the set point was a bit strange though, because Sinner hit that running forehand down
mhm,
the line
mhm.
and seemed to slip.
Yes.
Right? He slipped,
Yes.
and really easy for Carlos to just hit the cross court back into the open court. Very easy.
So this was a problem for Sinner. I think for the last, at least in the fourth and the fifth, when he was running to his right, he didn't look very good. And
No, he did.
he's usually got a great running forehand, and it's a perfect transition. I was going to ask you about this no matter what. What did you make of Sinner's movement? I have three. There are 3 possibilities that I've juggled around in my head because to me his movement was not good enough and not as good as it usually is. Either it was the hip, whether it be weakness in the hip or something related to the hip injury that he came in with, fatigue, just lack of conditioning, and that's why his movement slowed down. Or the third option, the clay was slippery and he just wasn't natural or comfortable keeping his balance and moving on the more slippery clay that was drier compared to the first week where it was damp.
Yeah. Once again, I think we're looking at a combination, because I think he may have alluded a little bit to the hip without spending much time on it. But I think the hip, I have to believe that was part of it, because that's where I think it would have come into play the most, is running for the wide forehand. And then the conditioning, no doubt that it didn't help him to have been in bed, have been sick, as well as having to deal with that injury. So he really got hurt on his preparation, not only with the tournaments and not being able to play a normal clay court circuit, but then with being sick. Yeah, I think those two maybe a little bit more than the slipperiness of the court, although that could have been a factor too. But I definitely don't think we saw the same physical, almost indestructible Sinner we were seeing early in the year. And there's no doubt we marveled at his movement earlier in the year. And at its stages of this tournament, he looked pretty close to where he had been, but not this match. And of all times to have it happen, this is the worst. You cannot give that speed contest away to Carlos. You can't. And that may have made, and considering that we're looking at the fourth and fifth sets of a very long match,
Yeah.
that it makes sense in a way, but I definitely felt like we didn't see the best Sinner in a physical sense, and it may have carried over into his mental state.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think it made him more inconsistent because he felt like he needed to dictate, where I actually think in this matchup, it's nice if he can lean on his defense a little bit. And
Yeah,
the length of the match, I think he looked very quick in the first set. And
yeah,
he won a lot of points in the first, scrambling, making an
right,
extra ball.
right,
Alcaraz would end up missing. And
right.
it was the kind of points where, okay, that was a bad error from Alcaraz, but good job by Sinner,
Yeah,
making
yeah,
an extra ball. So that
totally agree.
that part of it fell off.
Yeah, no, totally agree. But it wasn't the same. You didn't see that same alacrity around the court in the fourth and fifth, not even close. And while with Carlos, maybe that was some of his best movement in the fourth and the fifth. But that was, I just feel like it could have ended up being different had Sinner been feeling 100%. We'll never know. What I like about Sinner the most, Gill, is that he will. The last thing he was going to do was come in there and say, "Well, look, Carlos played well today, but to tell you the truth, my hip was hurting and I wasn't right, and I was sick before this," and start going into all the alibis. He's not. That's not him. But you saw him, I'm sure, with the handshake, right?
What was the handshake like? I mean,
Well, it
I
was
was watching, but
no. What I mean is, it was perfectly respectful. It was they like each other. It was
yes.
nothing kind of belligerent or bitter about it, but it was quick. It was
Mhm.
quick. It looked to me like Sinner was really upset, not with Carlos. Carlos didn't. He wasn't thinking that Carlos had pulled anything on him, and he knew Carlos had played really well. I think he was really upset with himself and really disappointed to lose. And I think it's a great sign. I like that. I like seeing that because it's got to sting. It's got to hurt a lot. He's a different guy now. He's now number one in the world. He now has a major in his pocket. He now comes into majors expecting to win them or hopeful that he can win them. So the fact that this would bug him, it looked like it bothered him more than Indian Wells did. And funny enough, I think he was a bit beat up and niggling injuries. A couple of little things happened in the Indian Wells match. So the physical side has let him down a bit the last two matches. And with Carlos, that's just not something he can afford to have happen.
Yeah, I agree on all fronts. The one thing I did notice is how quickly he left the court. And I also got the sense that he was disgusted. And
Yes.
I totally agree that it's a good thing. It's something that I look for. It's something that we don't, I don't need to talk about players who I think have not expected enough out of themselves, but it definitely tells you something about the player and what their level of ambition is based on how they take losses to top players.
Yeah, and came through a bit in his press conference too. Not again, no bitterness, but
Yeah.
disappointed. I'm disappointed. You could see it, you could feel it, and but especially in the just the way that he approached the handshake with Carlos, and as you say, how quickly he left the court. I think this one, that it's good for him that he has to get back up on the horse quickly and get ready for Wimbledon and move past this in a hurry.
Yeah, I want to make one point about him becoming number one. It happened in a slightly unfortunate way just because what made it official was Djokovic's withdrawal.
Yeah,
But I was you know, I just want to say, like, it's a 52-week system, and Sinner in the last 8, 9 months has done enough where mathematically this was going to happen. I mean, he's ahead in the race by more than 1,000 points. He was going to
right.
be number one, and
Yes.
it was either going to be at Roland Garros or sometime during grass season or after Wimbledon. Like, it was coming.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. It was inevitable, and you could see it was coming. And yeah, I think really even once he won Australia, but certainly once Miami was over, there was no doubt about it. And he deserves it. He deserves it. But obviously, what he's shooting for, Gil, I think he knows a lot of this is based on stuff he did toward the end of last year too. He wants to stay number one. He wants to end this year number one, and to do that, it's going to depend a lot on the last two slams here. And so it's going to be fascinating because meantime, you have Carlos, who needs to start winning more titles, but almost surely will. And Carlos, it was such a big lift to him, as long as he doesn't get hurt again. Indian Wells was also a big boost, but then, next thing you know, his clay court circuit is completely disrupted, and he's missing the first two events and missing the last one, and just wasn't what he wanted it to be. So I just feel like it's going to be an interesting race, because for Novak, obviously, he's not really even thinking about it. He's not going to be in it. He has to just try to start winning a few tournaments, and when he comes back, and he won't even really be a part of this. It's really going to come down to Jannik and Carlos, and I'm fascinated to see how that plays out, particularly their next match, Gil, because now this is two comeback wins in a row for Carlos over Sinner, and Sinner cannot be happy about that. Meantime, Carlos is like, look, I can deal with this guy now. I can do it.
Where do you stand on Alcaraz versus Sinner long term right now? Do you see it as an even race? Do you see Alcaraz as ahead of the race? Because I think that's where we would have stood, 1 year ago today. We would have said, okay, I think Alcaraz is, long-term, his prospects long-term look better than Sinner's, but Jannik improved so many things in his game at the second half of last year, and carried it over to this year, where now I think it's not as clear.
Oh, completely agree. But I felt, here's what makes it interesting though. Coming into Indian Wells final, I would have picked Sinner to win that match going in, given that Sinner hasn't lost all year, and then he has that nice first set, and he doesn't end up winning that, and Carlos gets a nice lift out of that, and then again at a 7-2 love here, and again at 2-1 here, I'm kind of liking his chances there. I'm not feeling about him at 2-1 the way I did about Zverev. I thought he had a pretty good shot. I thought there was a decent chance he could win in 4 at that stage. So I just feel like right now it comes down to these next 3 or 4 matches they play. In other words, I don't think that Sinner can afford to let Carlos get on a roll here and beat him 5 in a row or anything like that. He needs to make a move pretty quickly, and I suspect he will. I think he'll get back into it in the next couple of matches. And my guess would be, Gil, that it's going to stay pretty close. If somebody takes a slight lead, okay, I'll say that's Carlos. But I don't expect him. I mean, we're 9 matches in now, and 5-4 for Carlos. Okay, so let's say we're at 20 matches. I still expect it to be, I would guess 10-10 or 11-9 Carlos. I still think it's going to stay very tight, because there are going to be a lot of days where Sinner's going to have that upper hand because of the improvements you mentioned. And again, it didn't end. I know it's a clay court, but it didn't end up being his best serving day either. He can do a little better than he did in that match, and I think probably he was disappointed, like you said, when the first serve deserted him in the critical game at the end of the 4th. That's not necessarily him. So I feel like it's still, I expect it to remain very tight and to be a pendulum swinging rivalry. What are you expecting?
I'm with you. Yeah. I think Sinner has shown me enough, because I would have said Alcaraz for a long time, but I think Sinner has shown me enough where I think they are on even terms now, and that those even terms are rarefied air. I think both of them are going to be on top for a long time, and the idea that the post Big 3 era, and in this case the post Novak Djokovic era, is going to be fruitful for a lot of people outside of the top 3. I don't believe that is coming, because I think Alcaraz and Sinner are that good that it wouldn't surprise me they actually hog up quite a bit of the biggest titles.
They will. I would be surprised if they didn't.
Same.
That's how I'd put it, because I think Medvedev is at a crossroads now, Gil. I mean, lose to de Minaur there, that's no disgrace, but it just has been a kind of a depressing period. He's had these finals. You look back to the U.S. Open last year, which was something of a revival, to beat Carlos and lose the final. The Novak was still a step in the right direction. The good fall, losing a final to Sinner, losing to Sinner in the semis of the year end. And then he goes to Australia and almost pulls it off there. And he's in the final in 2 sets up against Sinner, loses that. I don't like where he's headed because, again, is it going to get any easier for Daniil? Like, he can't stand playing Carlos. I know he beat him.
I have one positive ray of hope for Medvedev, and that is everything he's done this year. And he's been okay, but not as good as maybe he would have liked. He's done all of it without really much of a serve, especially compared to 2021 and 2020. Medvedev is one of the biggest servers in the game back then.
Right.
He's had to, so he's still breaking serve a lot. He's not holding as much as he needs to. He's not serving well. And he's attributing that to a shoulder issue. So my hope for Medvedev, Steve, is that the shoulder gets fixed. Suddenly he gets his serve back, and now he's back in the conversation.
Well, that's the hope. And I know I've read about that shoulder. I've heard, I followed that. Sometimes, so I look at his MPHs in some of these tournaments, sometimes better than others. But I just feel like that may solve part of the problem, but that these two guys, especially, I mean, Sinner's turned the corner against him after, the rivalry's completely turned around. And Carlos, I feel like it's an even tougher matchup for Daniil. And despite that open win, that was a great performance and maybe a slightly uneven one from Carlos, but the Carlos wins over Daniil, I just feel like he can sometimes toy with him. And I worry about those matchups. And the fact that the de Minaurs of this world, there's a lot of guys out there that can hang in there with Daniil, and even with Daniil serving bigger and better. I hope I'm wrong. I don't want to see him out of the mix. And I also think he's worthy of a second major, but he's going to have some difficulties. I mean, I'm not banking on him getting that second major, but maybe it happens. At least, I don't know what the percentages are. I guess the percentages are in his favor, but I'm not convinced it's going to happen. Do you think he'll get a second?
I'm going to say I'm more confident Medvedev gets a second than Zverev gets a first.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I find it kind of similar. I'm slightly more optimistic, but only slightly because of what's going on out there. And I want to see Daniil. The thing I want him to show me is that he can start beating the daylights out of some of these other guys and then come into the big matches feeling like, I mean, obviously in Australia, that it finally got him in the end, that, the string of tough 5-setters and the 5-setter with Zverev in the semis and then having to play another one with Sinner, he gets, he takes a lot out of himself. It's no wonder that he gets sore shoulders and feet that are, the foot injury that kept him out after Australia.
Yeah, and that part I'm curious to see. Like, I've never seen a 6'6" guy have to move this much corner to corner and defend this much.
Right.
And like, I don't know. So far, he's been healthy. Fingers crossed that he's going to stay healthy. I've just never seen anybody do that. And it's a part of my thinking, and it's on my radar. The idea, like, is this a formula to last a long time? I mean, we see it in the NBA. The point guards last longer than the centers. So there is, and it's not a rule, right? There are exceptions, but generally that's how it goes. And 6'6" player who defends all day, it's on my radar screen. I want to hit on Tsitsipas. We've talked about Alcaraz's latter two opponents. Tsitsipas was the quarterfinal opponent. It's gotten to the point for me with Stefanos that I really question if lack of belief against Alcaraz is getting in the way of his performance. Because to me, this match, it wasn't just about the backhand. I don't think he did a lot of other stuff well either. And I found the last 3 performances against Alcaraz, that's been the case.
Yeah, they're almost carbon copies. He can have one close set like he did in the 3rd set last year, and this time the 2nd set, which he takes to the tiebreak. But I agree, he wasn't able to impose himself much with his forehand, and it's definitely, he hates that matchup too. He hates it every bit, if not more than Daniil hates to play Carlos. So let's look at it though. I remember we talked, we go back to the beginning of the clay court circuit and didn't know, neither one of us, I think, were terribly optimistic. He did manage to get Monte Carlo, and then the final the next week. And that was a good start. The rest of the clay circuit didn't go that well. He does okay in Paris. But I don't know where it's going from here, Gil. I don't know. I don't know what to expect. I don't, we've never seen great stuff from Wimbledon. I'm not expecting much there. The question's going to be when he gets back onto the hard courts, can he kind of resume his winning ways? I just feel like he's probably going to end the year like 8-9 in the world. A little climb, but not much.
I really liked his mental at the start of this clay season. I just thought he looked more focused and more determined. So that was good to see. But yeah, I got to see it for a long time, and I want to see it on hard court. Those are my thoughts right now. It's just the Alcaraz matchup, man. I don't feel that he's ready to go out there and play with Fury and like I just want to see what happens if he serves well and hits his forehand well and defends hard and moves well against Alcaraz, because I don't discount that it's a bad matchup. It's absolutely a bad matchup. He's also not the better player, but the way he's been playing these matches, it's below his ability. And
I agree.
I don't think he's taking the court. I don't know what the reason is, but what I would guess is that head to head has gotten to him. And then what he said after the match, what did you make of this, Steve? That he basically said, like, kid's too good. He's too good.
Yeah.
I'm paraphrasing, but that was the vibe.
Oh, that's exactly what he said. Yeah. I thought the exact opposite of how you and I agreeing that it was terrific that Sinner was distraught and annoyed and really disturbed by his loss.
Right.
And so he wasn't coming out and saying, look, Carlos is too good for me now. I'm worried. No, I think his attitude is much more, I've got it. I'm going to come back at him. He's a great player, but I could have won today. And no, Tsitsipas, that's a terrible thing to say. It's the last thing you should hear him saying. Even all the rest of us can say it, but his attitude ought to be, look, I'm going to keep, we're going to play a lot more times. And yeah, he's been outplaying me, but I'm going to keep going back to the drawing board until I find a solution. There should be some defiance. And that was a very bad sign.
Yeah, I felt that way as well. I think, he should have been, I got to play better and I will play better, and we're going to figure out a way, because he can perform better. He just didn't seem that upset about the whole thing.
Still wish, I just wish they would get, I understand he seems to have found a little better balance with his father, but I'd still like to see somebody else in that corner. I mean, look, his father, I'm not going to knock the job he's done. He got him to a certain level, and I'm sure there have been some positives to it, but I still feel like he needs some fresh, different thinking. And, it gets back to what you're saying about this matchup. Maybe somebody else comes in and puts on the DVD and says, we're going to look at every match you played against Carlos, and I'm going to go. And, they start really honing in on that and the other key rivals, but just somebody who thinks a little differently than his father does, and I thought he could have had it with Philippoussis. I was hopeful that was going to work out. I thought Mark was doing a good job with him and could have continued. So I still feel that could make a difference in his career.
I agree, and I would love to see it, but I think it would probably, the problem with Philippoussis is that it was a two-person show, and it ended up being too many cooks in the kitchen. And we've seen that a lot with different setups when you have a parent involved, where you get the multiple voices, and then that's no good at all. But I agree.
I guess what I'm suggesting is I'd like to see Tsitsipas's dad do something like Coco's dad did, and Gil brought him, and he doesn't disappear, and I'm sure he's still giving Coco plenty of advice. But I'd love to see. But I also like, I haven't seen signs from his father does not want to let go, so it's going to be up to Stefanos to do that if that's what he wants.
Casper Ruud, before we get to Novak, he is fourth in the race halfway through the year. Are you excited about Casper Ruud right now? Or do you feel like it's been a consistent year? It's fourth in the race, but hasn't really blown your mind?
More the latter. I mean, I've been impressed. It's been a higher level. He's back. He's played some great tennis, and he played very well there. Who's to know what would have happened if he'd had to play Novak? That was a break, but so be it. he still had another really terrific French and a great clay court circuit. But yeah, you talk about four in the race. My guess is he still squeezes into the year-end championships, but more like 7 or 8. I don't think he's going to stay there. If he does, I'd be very impressed. If he can, and if he ends this year in the top 5, I tip my hat to him. I don't expect it. I expect him to be much more in the 6, 7, or 8 range, more likely 7 or 8. But it's a very good start, and he is playing some of his best tennis. And he was unlucky too, Gil. No doubt he had that a little stomach ailment there, did not help. Would he have beaten Zverev? He still probably wouldn't have beaten him, but that really that sealed his fate.
Yes. I think he needed that Zverev win, and unfortunately didn't have much of a chance to get it because of the stomach thing. But to really put a stamp on his first half of the season, I do think that Casper has recovered, and it's not the Ruud of last year, and it's clearly a top 8 level Ruud who's being aggressive on his forehand and is threatening with the backhand down the line again.
Right.
So that's good to see, but I don't think it's much different as far as if we're doing tiers than like Andre Rublev tier. I don't think he's above Andre Rublev tier.
That's absolutely right. No, I feel that way too. That's why I say he maintains that position. If that's where he ends the year, that's a stupendous effort. I just don't think he can quite keep that pace, but he set himself up to have a good chance to make the year-end championships and to stay in the top 8, to be in the top 8.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's end on the state of Novak Djokovic. This is a question that I actually asked Noah Eagle when he came on the show after Novak pulled out. And I'm going to ask you the same question because I think it's a good one. Are you more confident or less confident about Djokovic moving forward in 2024 after seeing the Roland Garros run and what he did in Paris?
A little bit more. I mean, I hated to see it have to end with the injury because that complicates things. I wanted to see him keep going. I thought he was going to beat Ruud, and there would be could have been a really hard fought tight semi with Zverev, and he might well have been able to get to Zverev physically, considering what we were talking about with all that Sasha had been through with the 2-5 setters early in the tournament. We'll never know all this. I thought it was leading to something. I still think he walks away, Gil, unbeaten. His body beat him, but nobody else did. Happy to have won those 5 setters and have done it with some real spirit and some verve. I mean, some real intensity, and he was exhilarated at the end of those matches as well. He should have been, and he finished the Musetti match brilliantly in the 6-love and the 5th, and then it was a nice 5th set against Cerundolo as well. So I feel like he got something out of that. Those were kind of reminded himself of how much he loves to fight and how much he loves to play. So to me, the whole thing is going to come down to not rushing back from this knee injury and hopefully not playing Wimbledon. I feel like that's too soon. It's hard for me to imagine. I guess if he got the go-ahead from the doctors and they're going to monitor it, and okay, but I'd like to see him start back with the Olympics and then maybe by the Open, as long as the knee is holding up well, he could be in an interesting position with the Open. All the other guys will have played a lot more tennis. They could be a bit more worn out, as they often are by the Open. It's a long season. And he will not have played that much. He will have had these interruptions, some of them just because he felt he needed them, took the time, didn't play that much, then losing early round matches, a couple of semis. I'm get back to your question. Yes, I'm still I'm always optimistic about him if I feel like he still wants it. And to me, there's every sign that he does. He's got too much pride to say, oh, look, I've done enough. I had the great 2023. I got up to 24 majors. What more do I really need to do? No, I think he wants at least 1 or 2 more and then say enough. And in other words, I still see him playing hard through the end of 2025. And I expect him to pick up 1 or 2 big prizes in that span.
Yeah, we're in lockstep on this because it's the effort and the desire. That's what I really wanted to see, because in so many of the losses, that part has gone flat leading up to Roland Garros. But for him to dig deep in those matches, it certainly makes me feel better about his mental state. I agree that Wimbledon's too soon. I think Hamburg looks very attractive the week after Wimbledon to get a clay court event in. before the Olympics if his knee is ready to do that. So that
I,
to
I,
me,
I don't have any problem with that. It's just Wimbledon, I think, would be too soon. But yeah, if he's ready by Hamburg, great, and get ready for the Olympics with it, excellent, no
mhm.
problem. But how do you feel about my thought on the Open? My feeling is if he's can get on something of a roll, start winning a lot of matches, maybe I don't know what hardcore if he plays Cincinnati, but probably would. And then come into the Open with. I just feel like he would be very eager to defend, and there'd be a lot of guys. I mean, Carlos and Sinner, maybe they're feeling a bit weary by then. Who knows? But I feel like he could be dangerous by the Open, and he definitely next year. If it didn't go right by the Open, try to play some events in the fall. Don't just take the fall off. Play a few events. Try to make your way into the he's going to have to work hard to get it to the championships.
Yeah, that's
With
true.
so try to achieve that, and then put a lot of energy into next year and going back to Australia and see where it goes from there. No, I feel good about his ability to sort of resurrect the career, to get his career back on his terms and show everybody that he's just not done yet.
Yeah, I think that will happen at some point, at least in moments. I don't know how prolonged it's going to be, but I do think we'll get that kind of I'm back moment, I'm back on top moment at some point. And could it happen at the US Open? Sure. I think the courts being quicker and slicker, I think that's better conditions for him at this point in his career.
Yeah,
He gets to play at night a lot. And I think your point about him being fresher than the field is certainly true. And also, when he becomes an underdog and young players like Sinner and Alcaraz become favorites, the mental components start to shift in his favor, I think, at that point a little bit more as well. Do you have any takes on the 3 a.m. finishes or the watering of the clay courts, ending on another controversial note? Because obviously, with what ended up going down with Novak, but even really before the knee stuff happened, there were some question marks about if everything was being operated in the most ideal way at RG.
well, he was. What was interesting to me was he was not happy about the sweeping of the courts.
Yeah.
Uh, you saw, and that wasn't just in the Cerundolo match. That was coming up in his earlier matches, and it never was related to whether he was winning or losing. I remember one of the early round matches where he was rolling, but he still was asking them at the end of the first set, can't we do this every other changer? So there was that issue. And I was surprised. Some of the announcers, like Paul Annacone, felt like they didn't quite understand his gripe, but I did, because he was saying the courts had changed, were different with all the rain, and therefore you needed to sweep them more because around the baselines they were getting chewed up. I thought he had a perfectly valid point about the sweeping of the courts. Now you were talking about the watering.
Yeah, I guess I would pair those two together
Okay,
because there were other
okay,
players who were saying, can we please water the courts?
yeah,
I
right.
just I just thought to me it looked like the players were having trouble moving on the clay court the entire second week.
They were, and then Carlos complained in the end. He said, "This isn't a clay court." Did you hear him say that?
I did. Yeah.
And that was interesting. He doesn't usually do that kind of thing, and he was basically saying, "This is like a hard court. There's no clay there." Yeah, I don't quite understand what was going on this year, and in the case of Djokovic, I can't see how that would have been a bad thing. To me, it's always a good thing to sweep the courts, and there couldn't be any drawback for either of the players for that to happen, and they wouldn't do it for him. And then there were the other complaints, like when Carlos made his complaint, the umpire just kind of nodded at him, but it felt like he couldn't do anything about that. It was an unusual Roland Garros in that sense. But on the other hand, I can't think of one where we had, I guess, 7 straight days of rain there. It was the
No.
first week was insane.
Yeah, I don't know what the science is behind the clay courts that might have messed things up. It probably did mess things up, but uh I don't know. I mean, all we can say is the courts seem to be in a less than perfect state. As far as the
Yeah,
three, and then as far as the late finishes, I mean, look, I do think in the major format with the days off, it's better to finish late than to stop play and start the next day. I don't think there's any place for that. But if you can adjust the scheduling so that you get rid of the later finishes. I also think that that is better for everybody.
I agree, but they already, Gil, have this 8:15, 8:30 starting time. They already start a night session. That's not. We're used to being what, 7 or 7:30. It's
But
already a large. Then
it's one match.
in the case of Djokovic Musetti, they threw on the Dimitrov match, and that's why Novak didn't start that match until like 10:40 or 10:45. It was very late starting time, and it ends up at 3:07 a.m. or 3:08 a.m. So should have been. I guess there was nowhere else they could put Dimitrov because of all the rain and moving guys around. That was very unfortunate. You had to stick another match because you can't afford that extra time. It's already starting late enough if it's starting after 8 o'clock.
Yeah, apparently they thought it was going to rain on the outer courts, and that's why they needed to get
Yeah,
Dimitrov and Bergs in on an indoor court. Although it didn't end up raining on the outer courts, so they could
yeah,
have played
yeah.
outside. So anyway, I mean that's how the cookie crumbled. Maybe they'll go to the drawing board. Emil Mauresmo said that they were going to look at some of these things, and we'll see. But certainly Roland Garros that gave us plenty to talk about, and this has been an amazing conversation as always.
Gil, I enjoyed it. Love bouncing things off you, and I'm glad you saw that. I'm glad you saw that moment with Carlos's hand because I think you're the only one. That's a great observation because I didn't know anybody else who did, and obviously you got that one glimpse. And I guess I, like everybody else, I was consumed by the Sinner hand because they went back to that several times, and that's all we were thinking about.
Yeah. And Steve, I know you're not on Twitter, but I was going to tweet it. I was ready to tweet it. And I told myself, let me try to see evidence one more time to make sure. And I never saw it again. So
Oh, okay.
yeah,
I got you.
it was just one little glimpse. But
I see. You were going to put something up if you saw another shot of it. I got you.
right. But I only saw one shot. I didn't feel comfortable that I was, definitely onto something. Turns out I was. So it's
Yeah,
funny.
yeah, you were. But he never really explained it. I'm not blaming Carlos, but I think frankly, Gil, the modern day you I was lucky enough to live through that era, going to press conferences in the 70s and 80s when back in the good old days when these conferences were much longer, there were many more tennis questions. Now they've been reduced to like 4 or 5 questions. They're really substandard because you just don't learn enough. And I think the players would answer the questions. It's not that they wouldn't do that, but they don't get asked enough questions. So there should have been a follow-up to Carlos. Tell us more about that, Carlos. When did it start? Where were you feeling it? Nobody asked that.
Yeah, the follow-ups are essential because
Yeah.
I mean, unless it's Daniil Medvedev, who's glorious in terms of
Yes.
press conferences, the players often they give you a hint, they don't give you the full story. You got to get the full story in the follow-up.
And in many cases, we would get it, but somebody else has their own question that they thought about earlier, and they don't, and nobody wants
Right.
to jump in. But when something as important as that, and you can bet, Gil, I doubt there was any other reporter in that press room that saw what you did on the screen. I don't think most people had not noticed any issue with Carlos. So it had to have been shocking to them to hear him say, "Oh, actually, I was cramping too." And then how can somebody not say, "Carlos, expand on that, please. Tell us, when did you feel it? What was it? Was it your right hand? How long were you bothered by it?" They didn't even do much of a very good job with Sinner on that.
Right. Well, you got to start with the knowledge that when a tennis player does this,
Yeah.
it
Oh,
means
yeah.
their hand is cramping. So,
Right. Right.
um, you know, that's that was the first thing. And, who knows? There's probably a lot of people who may have even seen this going on and didn't really know what it meant. All right. Well, we won't have to wait very long to do this again. We'll chat after Wimbledon. Thanks so much
So,
as always, Steve.
just quickly give me, you had to pick
Yeah.
somebody today. Who is it?
Oh, I have no idea. I can't even give you someone because when I put something out there, then I lean towards sticking with my guns and I
Yeah.
don't want to be in that position. But if now that you've opened the door, if you want to go for it, I'm sure the viewers would be interested.
No, I will say this. I'm not expecting Novak to play.
Hmm.
So Carlos and Sinner and Carlos are now 1 and 2 in the world. I think there's a pretty decent chance they get to that final. Zverev is not happy on the grass. Medvedev is not, even though he got to the semis last year, he's not really at home on the grass. You look at the other top players. Tsitsipas hasn't proved himself on the grass. I think, Sinner coming off the semi last year, Carlos winning it last year. Why wouldn't they? And both of them being as at the top right now, I think there's a very decent chance we get that final. I'd love to see it.
I'm leaning that way too. So
Yeah.
let's see if that ends up happening. It is a rivalry that gets everybody excited, which is great.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Gil. As always, I enjoyed it, and I look forward to post Wimbledon.
All right, me as well. See you then.